Take 28. My name is Key. I am a graphic designer and a design educator, and this is my YouTube page. I'm probably going to use this space to just shoot the breeze about design because I love everything graphic design. I love everything about design in general. And the first thing that I want to do, the very first thing, is to critique a design from one of my former students because one, the student is awesome. Two, the student does have a little bit of space to grow. And three, I love poster design, and this gives me an opportunity to not only critique this design, but to do it in a way that I would have done this design had I approached it myself. Now, I do want to put a caveat out there. It's really important to get feedback. It's really important to get several perspectives of feedback on a specific design. And yes, my feedback will be rooted in design fundamentals, design principles, all that good stuff. But, and this is the big but, the biggest but, while I am going to be redoing this design, I'm not necessarily looking for this particular student to take what I did as the gospel and say that
This is the one and only way to do this design.
it's not. There are several ways to take the feedback that I'm going to provide, but I do want to give a little space to giving that objective feedback, but also showing what I would have done had I been on the receiving end of that feedback. All right. Because I don't want this video to be super long, let's go ahead and get started. So right off the bat, there are a few things that I really want to go ahead and point out as just A pluses in terms of design choices. There are some. The first is that this particular design takes a lot of risks when it comes to how we understand that linear grid. There are things in here that start to break that perspective and try to bring in a little bit of dynamic movement. And I really appreciate that. But there are certain ways to go about introducing that dynamism that can push this design even further. But before I get into that, I do want to talk specifically about some of the things that are catching my eye in terms of what is working against this design right now. First, there are a number of craft issues. And when I say craft issues, I mean technical issues. There are some masking issues. We have this weird little cutoff here where it does not seem intentional. Same with the little trumpet here. We have a masking issue in the hair where it starts to fade out. Probably because hair is really difficult to clip if you're not sure what you're doing in Photoshop. There are these little bits and pieces that are just hanging off and they look accidental. The other piece of feedback that I think is really important when it comes to this design is the lack of strategic hierarchy. There is hierarchy, of course. You can clearly see that you are supposed to start from the title, move down to the image, and down to the supplementary text. That is pretty straightforward. This layout is very simple, so there's no way you can really get confused about where you're supposed to look. However, the way the weight is distributed, particularly between the header and the supplementary text, don't work well together. It's a little odd to me that the supplementary text is so bold and the header is not. And then there's also this lack of proportionality between how big the header is and how big the supplementary text is. Yes, the header is bigger, but it doesn't necessarily feel proportionate. It doesn't feel balanced. There's also the use of typography here and the imbalance of visual language. We have this, what feels like it should be this Afro futuristic typeface, but then we have what feels like a race car typeface almost. Now, I will commend the student for using an in dash instead of a hyphen, but something tells me that was more of a professorial point out than a design decision that he made on his own. But I will give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he knew to use the in dash. You should also use the in dash. But there is a little bit of confusion between those two forms of visual language. And when you tie in the image itself, it's hard to see where some of this more futuristic visual language ties into the rest of the design as a whole. And I think the thing that is bugging me the most about this design, outside of the hierarchy, is the disjointed nature of the color composition. There is this, I'm having some layer issues. What's happening? My pen's too small. There's this orange and blue gradient in the background, and this orange is creating this backlight, right? But the backlight is not interacting with the subject at all. There is no presence of kind of that orange rim light that you would expect to see if this thing were being backlit. There's also no interaction of ambient light onto the subject either, meaning there's no blue present in the subject. And there is this sense of harsh lighting kind of down the middle of the subject. Not perfectly down the middle, but it's pretty much down the center. You can see the light source. You can see where the light is coming from and the interaction with shadow. And because of that, it makes it feel a little disjointed because the rest of the composition does not have that same sense of lighting. Now, a lot of designers don't pay attention to this, but I really think that it's important to do when you're designing something that has a subject matter that already predetermined. Like if you are working with a stock image or an image that's provided to you by a client, it's really important to pay attention to the lighting so that you are able to play with that lighting in the actual design so it feels like the subject is more naturally integrated into the design. If this student had made this decision, I think the subject would feel more naturally ingrained in this design. I'm also just not a fan of this yellow. I don't fully understand it in terms of the color harmony here. It feels like a bit of a random choice, but let's see what happens when we take this from the sketch phase, which is very important. Do not skip the sketch phase, to the finishing phase. All right, let's go. So you'll probably notice that I am in different attire. I did not change clothes just for the heck of it. It is a new day because I believe in rest and rejuvenation, and I had client projects to work on. So there's that. But I'm actually glad that I took that small break because there is something very important that I forgot to mention before we jump into the sketch phase, and that's research. I don't know this artist, and because of that, I want to make sure to look into everything that I can about them. I want to look up their style, their general aesthetic. What is their brand? What does their music sound like? What is the vibe of that music? And how can we incorporate those elements into the design and make intentional design choices? Also, how do we spell their name correctly? That is a little bit of shade because this student did not spell this artist's name correctly. And that's a big no no. I know that it gets really difficult because after a while, letter forms just feel like push around elements and it's easy for those things to go undetected. But when you have names like this and like my own that wouldn't necessarily be flagged by a spell check engine, it's really important that you do that extra due diligence to make sure that their name is spelled correctly. It's also just important to do research in general before you start sketching so you have an idea of what direction you want to go in and not really be shooting blindly into the abyss. I've already done my research, so I'm actually going to go ahead and jump into the sketch phase. And then after that, I'm going to speed through the design phase and we're going to talk about the design on the other side.
Reminiscing the good old days, remembering to forget all the bad ones. I remember when college seemed so important, but is it worth it? Been wondering what truly matters to me. I know for sure it's not a fancy degree. I'd like to do what I love, but what if I'm not good enough? Split personality, sometimes sour, sometimes sweet. An M. Night Shyamalan story called Everything's Peachy. Can we just skip straight to the plot twist, please?
That took forever. It took a little bit longer than expected, probably because there was a lot of event information that was missing that I didn't really think about as I was sketching. I find myself thinking about the user a lot. Like, what information are they going to want to know? How much tickets are, where this is actually located, what's the logo of the place where the performance is happening. It's also important to think about music connoisseurs who may not have ever heard of this artist. So, showing that they have some kind of credential behind them, like this artist being a 6-time Grammy nominee, seems pretty important. And that can be a selling point for people who may not have heard of this artist but are interested in learning more about him. All in all, I'm kind of satisfied with the design, kind of seeing them side by side, and pretty happy with the direction that I chose. There are a few things that I would change, but I have client work to do, so I'm not going to spend that much time on this. If I am so compelled, I might actually come back and do this design again. I'm really thankful for the student for allowing me the chance to critique this design. I cannot wait to see what they end up doing with the feedback. And I am really excited to have started this YouTube journey with this particular project. So let's see how this goes. And if you want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe. And yeah, remember that good design means making good design choices. Hit that subscribe button and make good choices.